I actually had an experience with performance anxiety, and I'm curious, as you hear this, for me it was high school. Like I felt it a little bit, but it wasn't until college, and it wasn't until I grad transferred to Vandy, and then I got the Chiefs. Like as the levels started to rise, my performance anxiety started to exacerbate, and for me it was, and I hope that I'm saying this right. For me it was before the game, like I couldn't eat, and I would throw up before almost every game. Is that something that you experience, or was it like a game thing, or was it just the sport itself, like practice or anything like that?
Well, first of all, I mean, thanks for sharing that.
Of course.
And those are definitely symptoms of anxiety,
Right.
and I think everyone's symptoms are different. Mine was definitely all around playing the sport. I think it was
Gotcha.
like the pressure of, we're undefeated, 22-0. The national player of the year is my teammate. Like, it was just never wanting to make a mistake or do anything wrong. And it was very volleyball centric. I know there's people who have social anxiety, they have test anxiety. Mine was, I mean, now I struggle with some social anxiety, but I feel like we all might, coming out of literally living under a rock.
COVID.
But yeah, it was very much tied to how I'm playing on the court. And I think you guys know as college athletes, like every single day you're statted. I mean, it's like you go from the bliss of playing as a high school athlete and like you're the best in your town and like everyone, whatever. And then you go to school and it's like every time you touch the ball, someone's making a tick and it's good or bad. Oh, and then there's someone in front of you and someone behind you and someone recruited to replace you. And we're comparing the numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what fueled it a lot.
Yeah. So, like, given that's what it is at the D1 level, like, what would you suggest to someone going through it who's maybe battling, like, an imposter syndrome or this performance anxiety? Like, what are, like, some tidbits that someone could take and then improve that situation?
So I'll actually have some good answers for you guys because I'm coming off of a recording
exactly.
with a two-time Olympian, future sports psychologist. I mean,
Wow.
she's mentored by, I don't know if you guys know Dr. Mike Gervais, but
Yeah.
one of the best.
He does a lot of Elite 11 stuff.
Yeah,
for quarterbacks,
that's her mentor. She's his mentee. I mean, she's brilliant, and she was an Olympian, so she's done it all. And a few things she shared with me today that were really powerful are, I mean, the first thing is anxiety is very future-oriented, sometimes past, but it's most of the time what's going to happen. Am I going to make a mistake? Am I going to lose? Like, your mind is not in the now, it's in the future. And so to kind of quell anxiety, you want to get back to the present moment. You want to get in the now. And the more that you try to get away from your anxiety and you don't want to feel it and you're like, oh my God, stop, this needs to go away, the more you fuel it. But if you just take that deep breath and you experience it, it'll start to quiet. And so a big thing we talked about today was how like presence is one of the antidotes to anxiety. And then secondly, and this is something I loved, is getting really clear on like who you are. What is your purpose for doing anything? Like, what is your purpose for playing football? What's your purpose for doing whatever it is in your life? Getting super clear on your philosophy so that in a moment where you feel threatened, in a moment where you're like, oh my God, what if I make a mistake? What if I get pulled? What if everyone laughs at me? You can call on who you are at your core, like your root core belief. And I think that's super powerful to know. And that's like inner work that people have to do off the court, off the field, so that in those intense moments, they're like, wait, I got my own back.
Is that last part?
I'm sorry, bro. That was really deep. Like, hold on. Can we at some point we're gonna have to lighten the mood, but like my chest was like pumping right there. Like I had flashbacks, so I was a punt returner. I'm lightening up the mood. I'm sorry. I have to. It's too much for me.
Sorry,
right
this
now.
is my flaw. I have to go deep. I can't have a surface level
I know.
conversation.
But like I'm taken back to like when I was at Vandy and I was catching a punt against like one of my first punts against like Georgia, and I'm sitting back there, I'm waiting for the punt, and like what you said, like I'm literally worried about dropping in front of all these freaking fans. Like that's what I was worried. I was like, I just can't drop the ball. Funny enough, after the third game, I saw a sports psychologist, and kind of going back to what you said about being present is something that she told me at the time was like, really just focus on just doing something you've always done. Instead of worrying about like, I need to catch this ball or like I need to score this touchdown. Let's like break it down to like the most basic level thing, which is like seeing the ball off the foot And then once you see the ball off the foot, like your body just, since you've done it so much, will just naturally carry you to do everything else. And then then the next focus is just catching the ball. Either doing one of the two, but like not worrying about like scoring a touchdown, not worrying about like everything else in the stadium, and also just smiling back there is something that she told me.
Gratitude is one of the ways to get back into the present moment, is to look around and say how grateful I am to be playing in front of these people.
That makes more sense.
I'm on this stage.
Yeah.
Like I said, presence is one of the antidotes to anxiety. So is gratitude. So is joy. Those emotions can really center you.
Yeah. That makes sense. Sorry, I had to say something, but also I had to like cut it real quick because I'm like, dude, my chest was honestly like pumping right there. I was like, oh my gosh, like, I felt like I was like back into a stadium. Like,
I remember
like
that
going
Georgia
through it.
game actually that you mentioned with the punt returning.
Yeah.
So like, were you in your head? Is that what you're saying?
That's kind of, I'm in my head, like I'm seeing everything around me. I'm just like, whew, this is too much. Instead of like the gratitude aspect of it.
Yeah. Do you guys feel like that trigger though? Like for me, playing as like goalkeeper and like, they're down the field and they're starting to run. Like I feel the anxiety because it's like it goes through all of them. It can't go by me, So it's like for me, I'm always like shoulders back, head up. Like I make this motion where I'm just like stand still and I immediately like triggers in me, like kind of shuts everything off. Like do you guys have like a trigger point where you're like, okay, take a breath, like get ready for the ball to be served? Like do you guys have like a moment? Because I feel like otherwise if my thoughts kind of just start to flood in my head, unless I'm just like, okay, go now.
Yeah, I've definitely gotten anxiety like playing quarterback, definitely like, big games in the SEC and all that, and then now I'm here at USC. But what's helped me a lot is self-talk. And so I just have to remind myself like how good I am and convince myself of that, because I just get in my head about it and I'll just find things like, oh, I had a bad practice on Tuesday, like I don't deserve to be here. And it'll be like, I guess, a little bit of imposter syndrome, like why me starting in the SEC or, here in the Pac-12. So I'll just like a recurring theme just in my head, like I'm the best, or like, something like that, like a little phrase.
That's great. And to go on another tangent here where I feel like I'm just quoting the best in the field, but I'm obsessed with like absorbing knowledge from the greats. And I feel like nowadays we live in a society where experts are putting their wisdom online for free. And so something Dr. Mike Gervais talks about is like confidence comes from self-talk. And people will say like, oh, confidence comes from like past experience. Confidence comes from XYZ. And he's adamant about your inner dialogue. Yeah. And so like, let's say we've all had a good game before, but that doesn't stop us from being anxious about the next game if we're saying, well, what if that game was a fluke? What if I mess up this one? So I think that's a great point. And I similarly had games at SC where I literally was like, I'm the shit, I'm the shit, I'm the shit, I'm the shit. And I just said over and over. So another thought couldn't creep in. You have to get cocky with yourself too. You have to. Yeah. And then there's a thought comes in, it's like, you're not that good. I'm like, I'm the shit, I'm the shit.
And I feel like you have to just throw great things out there in the universe. Like just real positive things. And that's something that I don't want to keep going back to my sports psychology, but that's something that she said too. It's like just, the gratitude is one aspect, but it's just the fact that you're just being positive around you. Now, quite honestly, like I think it's just a great life thing, right? It's just being really positive. I don't know. Yeah. What do you think?
Well, okay. So something you said earlier resonated with me as well. It's like having an identity outside of sports, because, if I have a bad day on the football field and my identity is all tied within football, then sure, I'm going to feel shitty about myself because that's my entire life. And we were talking about this with Max, your boyfriend, of course. And so, everything was going well for him. And then, the story better than anyone. But, he ends up getting benched, I think after a Stanford game or something like that. And, as a prize recruit, and you work your entire life for something and then you just see it crash. But then he was able to find, solace in, like, relationships with you, family, and, like, extracurriculars. So I think that's really important, too. And I see a lot of my teammates and, student athletes around the country, right? But, like, their identity is literally solely tied to this one thing. And that's something I learned the hard way.
And if your identity is tied to your sport, and if we like really think about that, that's like every time I go back to serve, my life is on the line. Yeah. Of course I'm anxious. Like if your identity is your sport, how could you even, that's like, that to me is like an image of like your family being held at gunpoint and they're like, if you don't win, everyone dies. Like that's what we're thinking when we're super tied to our sport. And so when, I think like, especially like sports culture sets us up to kind of like mentally fail. And I guess it's harsh, but like think about it this way. Sports culture is like, oh, you can't have a plan B. It's not if we win, it's when we win. Like there's all these things they tell you so that, for example, someone like Max feels like he's accepting loss if he fathoms a lifestyle without sport. Like I actually think I play better when I accept that hey, if I were to get benched, my life would go on and I'd be happy one day. Cool. Now I can actually play free because I'm like, I will survive the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
So when athletes have like no plan B, it's when we win, I'm like, you're just putting more weight on your own back.
Yeah, and oftentimes you figure that out too late. So for me, it's injury, and most people it is injury because you're sidelined. And then right now, my ACL, but even before then. So that's how I started this organization, like this truck that we're in where we distribute food. That's how I found interest outside of football, met people outside of the sport itself. But I think, hopefully if you're watching this message and like hopefully it's before a traumatic event like that, you can find that identity. I think it helps a lot. I don't know if you've had an experience like that, but.
I mean, for me, I don't want to say I epitomized that, but while I was with the Chiefs, I also had a chance to go back to Goldman.
Yeah.
And so, like, as every day I went out there, I was like, all right, like, if my time here is up, like, I have a pretty good job that everyone else wants on the other side. But at the same time, I think that also does, like, play into, like, how I approach things. Like, there is one aspect of it being free, but there's also, like, like guys that are growing up in, middle of Louisiana and New Orleans out in the hood, like
that's all they have.
That's all they have.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so like
It's tough.
the hunger and the bite is not as strong when, you have something kind of like you can fall back on sometimes, at least in my opinion. That's kind of my experience.
Well, that's the coach's perspective too, right? And so like they're that old school mentality that's like if you're not all in on football or volleyball or whatever sport, then the guy who is going to take your spot and then put more time in to be better.
Right. And to your point, like, I think that's a great point. Everyone has different situations, and that might be their only way out, or that might be what they want to give back to their family.
Yeah.
I think, too, just that perspective of, like, okay, I'm still going to be loved if this doesn't work out. Because with anxiety, I think our mind can be so catastrophic that, like, we truly think our world's going to end. And then when we dissect, like, what does world ending mean? Like, are there other paths to greatness? Are there other ways to do X, Y, Z?